leaving a day of rest in there, that brings us to the end of Dude Week on the channel. I hope it has been useful and informative to some of you. Any questions or anything, do please leave them below. But that still leaves us with one remaining big question, really, and that is, what even is masculinity? What is it to be a man in this modern age? Feminists have been struggling with the idea of what it means to be a woman for some time, and this is kind of emerging out in the struggle between the trans-exclusionary radical feminists and the more liberal, libertine feminists. They've spent, the radical fringe, a very long time deconstructing gender, saying that it's kind of meaningless, while at the same time as they are breaking down these feminine roles and so on, they've also been talking about the sacred feminine or something special about being a woman, and it's this contradiction that seems to lead them into their conflict with trans women. Trans women are performatively female, and if they can present themselves as female, if they can do this by acting female, it means that there is something more to this, something challenging to the radical feminist fringe. I don't think we want to take the same route in examining masculinity. We don't want to make it an absolute in the same way that the trans-exclusionary radical feminists do, I don't think. And being performatively male is perhaps even more constricted, even more tight than being performatively female, whereas we're trying to open it up, I think, a bit. Maybe I'm not the best person to talk about this, because I've always had kind of problems with my masculine identity, not being male or being a man, but I was always interested in artistic and intellectual pursuits and was always bullied and marginalised because of those. You know, that's considered unmanly. The work that I do doesn't pay particularly well, and that can be challenging. You know, I am ill mentally and on benefits. That's something a man isn't supposed to do. Yeah, that's challenging. That's a breakdown of a male identity. I clutched for straws for something that I could use to define myself in a masculine way, and for me that was stoicism. I can take all this shit that the world throws at me and endure it, and that has been useful, which is why previously I cautioned about taking this away from people, but because it was all I had, it was the only tool I knew how to use. You know, if all you've got to hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So what I'm trying to say is that I've been on this line of trying to work out what masculinity is, how to negotiate the structure and be masculine in this new world for a very long time, and not being very traditional. For a while when I was young, there wasn't really a model of masculinity per se. There was no wave of ideas of what a man was. Then the new man thing came in, and because, you know, I was more cerebral and artistic and so on, I kind of latched onto that, thinking that was a really good and wonderful thing. So it seemed a way out of being bullied for being unmasculine. I was more sensitive and understanding and so on. So it was something of a shock to discover that girls didn't like new men very much at all. As the song by Bill Hicks goes, chicks dig jerks. So that was shocking and difficult to process, that there was all this social impetus to be the nice guy, in both the negative sense, by trying to modify people's behaviour so they would behave as nice guys even if they weren't, and to try and accept nice guys, but it wasn't really there wasn't anything to it. Then the new lad thing came along, and I never liked drinking. The lads mags left me cold with their pneumatic fakery and all the rest of it. That didn't suit me either. So at no point in my life have I ever felt that I fit into any particular masculine niche, other than perhaps if I'm self-aggrandizing, the kind of intellectual wing. The Dawkins and the Hitchens, the witty authors, the Alan Moores, the Douglas Adams, the Neil Gaimans, people like that. That's a kind of male niche that I think I can place myself into. But it's still about accomplishment, and you are always measuring yourself against other people. You can't help but do that. I mean, that's how you measure whether you've accomplished something or not. So that's not necessarily particularly healthy either. I think it's easier to say what we don't want to do, and the comparisons have to be drawn with feminism. There's a type of feminism that is disparagingly called choice feminism by some more collectivist feminists. And the way that they disparage it actually sounds pretty fucking cool. The idea that whatever you choose to do, and the operative word there being choice, as a woman, that's great, that's feminist. You're choosing to do it, you're a woman choosing to do it, that's fantastic. But that comes into for criticism from other wings of feminism. You're letting the sisterhood down. But this idea of choice feminism, I think, is something that men should probably adopt as choice masculinism, or whatever you want to call it. To accept anything that a man does as being an expression of manhood, anything that he chooses to do as an expression of manhood, that seems to me to be the most open, accepting, welcoming, individualist, and yet at the same time universalist way of looking at things. That seems to me to be the liberal solution. So if a man wants to stay at home and look after the kids, be a house husband, you can see that through a masculine lens as being the protector and the provider in ways that aren't fiscal, aren't material, aren't as a result of separating yourself from the family and making that sacrifice. Instead, you're sacrificing the other way, and this applies for housewives and so on as well. That's the other half of the problem that I think feminism has, is that rather than adding to what was there, it just switched the prejudice around. So where the traditionalist women of old would be prejudiced against women who broke boundaries and did things that women weren't supposed to, feminism switched that around and now is hypercritical, and then was hypercritical, of anyone who wanted a more traditional life. I mean, personally, I don't understand the appeal of traditionalism or doing things just because. But in this world, where we're all fully cognizant of all the possibilities that we could choose for ourselves, if you choose a traditional life, I don't think that's something that should be looked down on. If a woman wants to be a homemaker, that should be celebrated and loved and considered well. And if a man does the same thing, just as much. And I think that's how perhaps we can turn what they call toxic masculinity into something positive, because there is something positive to everything that they call negative. When you start to look at what they consider to be toxic masculinity, and you really kind of deconstruct it and look at it, particularly if you look about men's roles in the past, historically and so on, you can see how a lot of traditionalism seems to have been based around channeling what they call toxic masculinity into positive forms. But what we need, perhaps, is more open and positive ways of changing that toxic masculinity into something positive. Competition comes in, and for a lot of scorn, men do compete. They compete for women's attention, they compete for success at work, they compete for status and so on. And this can become dangerous and nasty, but rather than finding ways to channel it in a good way, we have been altering the work environment to be more feminine and cooperative. I don't like sport, but other people do, but we've been attacking that, considering it frivolous and a waste of time and undermining it and so on, in a way that probably negatively impacts a lot of men. Competition isn't seen as healthy, and that may be part of the reason why some of the up-and-coming generations seem a bit soft to older men. The idea that men can't be emotional, or shouldn't be emotional, is seen as a negative. But the positive side of the stiff upper lip and being strong and all that is so someone holds their shit together in bad situations and then lets it out later. You know, there's nothing necessarily wrong, and there's a lot right with emotional continence, you know, holding your emotions back, being in control. And since people find male emotions so dangerous and negative, you know, there's a positive social aspect to that as well, as being in control, and it's a positive. But it does make it hard for men to open up, and men open up and show off their emotions in ways that are different to the ones that women do, and they process their emotions differently. We need to recognise that, not ignore it. Violence. You know, violence sounds like it would always be negative and bad and terrible, but violence can be used to protect, to take care of, to defend, and we've channeled that into duty and so on in the past. Men have frankly been exploited in a lot of wars for reasons that are probably opaque to the average soldier completely. But it doesn't mean that our physicality and so on can't have an upside, a plus side. The irony in all of this, quite a great deal, is that it's women who are going to have to change in order for men to be able to change, because at the end of the day, most men want to please women. They want to be what a woman wants. So the woman is in control, very much so, and to a degree always has been, of how men are. And it's all very well saying one thing, but if you don't follow through on it, then it's not going to be any use in changing the way that men are. If you say one thing and do another, it's not going to get anywhere. So a lot of the responsibility for change in men has to lie with women. But in the current paradigm, in the current setup, this is being done in the form of belittling and undermining, hating on, excluding. This is why I have such a problem with modern feminism, because being an old school lefty, what I'm for is egalitarianism, treating people the same. These revenge-filled diatribes, the constant, unceasing, unending undermining of men, it's not egalitarian. It's got nothing to do with justice or equality or fairness. It's sexism, and that has to end. If there's a form of masculinity I want to see, it is men being accepted by women, by other men, for whatever they choose to do, and trying to do it well. You know, that's a positive role for competition and one-upmanship and this drive to succeed that so many men have. You know, we want to do well, but to do that we need to know what the goal is, and the goal needs to be steady, and we need to be supported and celebrated for the things that we do. And way back at the start of these videos, fairly early on, I talked about how the paradigm for men hasn't really changed in the way that it has for women. Some people don't seem to understand what I'm talking about. I mean, there's no doubt that in the past, men did genuinely have privilege. They had special rights and so on that women did not. And these special rights were paid for by certain impositions and duties that men also had. To be called up to go to war, to be responsible for their wife's debts, things like this. As we've moved towards equality, men's privileges have disappeared, but both legally and socially, the expectations and demands of men haven't. I mean, the man used to be the sole breadwinner, and the court system, the divorce proceedings, and so on still treat that as though it's the case, even though most families are now two-income families and have to be in order to get by. You know, that's just one concrete example of how that's changed. So there's a lot of resentment building up in men, some of it justified, for the fact that they have over generations willingly given up all of this privilege, but so much is still being expected from them. that isn't being expected from the other gender. And to blame everything on men constantly in this secular version of original sin that we see trotted out all the time. You've got privilege, you can't speak, you have to listen to... It's not equality, and people are quite right to get angry and pissed at being treated in that way. So let's end on a positive note then. Like I say, I want masculinity to be whatever a man does, and does well. And I want men to be celebrated and encouraged and made to feel like a man, whatever it is that they choose to do. Zang.
Today. See, I don't like the, I have, okay, like a lot of you, I hate a lot, you know? But I hate with style and creativity. Yeah!